Okay, with any good septic story, of course, I'm battling flies. I got 2 flies in here. Anyways, here we go. So, yeah, we postponed the closing. The 20 acres was fenced and never had any cows on it. However, while the seller was moving, the fence was left open. The cow had wandered over to the 3,500-gallon container of shit, walked right on the top of it, and fell right through the plastic. The seller's bright idea was to shoot the cow. So that night he went back to the cabin and killed the cow. The problem with that is that a live cow would try and climb out. Now we have a large dead cow floating in a completely broken makeshift septic tank. The agent representing the seller went out to the site and noticed that there was a dog standing on the floating cow and also stuck in the tank. The seller's agent husband got the dog out and it ran back to whatever nearby ranch it came from, which in itself is so gross. Could you imagine your dog coming through the doggy door covered in raw sewage? Super stinky. Worse than a stink, I figure. Worse than a skunk, I figure. One good thing about the mountain is there is a get-it-done attitude when it comes to ranches. At the time, I had a new septic guy, Jimmy. Jimmy was just getting out on his own and was willing to work for it. He charged $500 to use the excavator and claw out the cow, pump the tank, and remove and dispose of the tank. When you have equipment, I guess it's not so bad. The cow was floating for a couple days, and when it was clawed out, the skeleton of the cow with vertebrae pulled right out of it. It had been almost liquefied by the septic. That's some powerful stuff. When we tell people about the transfer station, I let them know if you have to throw away something after hours, you just make sure you get it in the large dumpster. Shoot, I even know a guy who threw away a septic tank in that dumpster. Jimmy did quite a few more inspections for me over the next couple years, and one job he said, "Hey Kev, look at this. This one's real full," and he turned his shovel around and threw it like a spear into the shit, and it stuck the handle in. Then he said, "Oh, it's real full. Check this out." And that effort jumped right in the full septic tank. He was then jumping on it like a trampoline. Bow, bow. It's disgusting. With the water below and all the waste, grease, and hair, he had a perfect waterbed style bouncer. Super sick though. The thing that you gotta know and plan for on a septic inspection is the handshake. Every time. They, and by they, I mean every one of them, always does something really nasty, raw sewage style. Then they always gotta shake your hand. They don't just casually offer, but they present it assertively so that if you don't shake it, it's definitely rude. But if you do shake it, then you better have a wipe, sanitizer, or alcohol. One of those was an essential part of selling in the mountains. Go with a gun, knife, bolt cutter, cell phone, and windy. And alcohol. Sanitizer. Ugh. We were hired to do a house flip for an investment firm that buys foreclosures to flip. I was told they had packages 60 homes at a time. This one was a flip and they were just foreclosing on it. The company hired us to facilitate cash for keys and then remodel the house and sell it. It seemed like we were always involved in one of these deals, but never more than one. It's very time consuming. This place was out in Onyx. This was the farthest house at distance that we had been involved in. It was just over the Paiute Peak and down the other side. We enjoyed selling property up there, but it's an off-road adventure to go up the mountain. So to get to Onyx, we had to drive all the way around the mountain, down to the lake, and then around to Onyx, the cute little cattle town with school and country store. The first thing we had to do was negotiate a cash for keys with the tenant. I can remember the dollar amount, but it was a bit funny to negotiate. We had to basically door knock these folks and ask them to leave. It only went because they're expecting it and we were offering money. The negotiation between buyer and tenant was a quick back and forth. However, the tenant required an extra bump of cash for moving expenses they were going to have to pay. The seller issued a cash for keys, we received the keys, and they were moving out. It was really humorous as well as a bit uncomfortable as the tenants moved right next door to their mother's place. Interesting negotiation skills. We took possession of the home. It was in need of a cleaning, new carpet, and that was about it. Few more small things. Since we had to drive so far to get to the project, it was an interesting one to try and flip, as the workday seemed to be a bit small from the long drive. The house was pretty dirty, so we had to start by cleaning. We made sure that every day after cleaning, we washed up good, hands and face. It was the most exhausting project. Every night we felt so tired and sluggish that maybe we were sick. It seemed like so much work. Everything was just difficult, although it was easy work. Like moving around with a backpack and weight belt on, as well as weighted shoes. After we had the place at night, after we had the place all nice and ready to go, we put it on the market. We procured a buyer and then received the title report. I didn't expect any issues as there was a team of people handling the seller's side, but guess no one checked. The water well for the home had been deemed contaminated by the county for uranium. This area is a granite mountain and had mining go on and had been told that it causes uranium contamination. I now know why I felt so sick for a week. In addition, it was a shared well with the mother of the former tenant next door, but there was no well agreement which is needed to close escrow. So I drafted the well agreement on my own, and the large house flipping company had their attorney draft a well agreement in addition. We went with mine, haha. The drafting of the agreement wasn't the difficult problem with it. Negotiating with the mother next door was more so. She was actually very nice and accommodating, just pretty nervous. We had badmouthed her kids quite a bit for their hygiene while cleaning up the place, which we were hoping she wasn't listening. So right next door. It did go smooth, and she was a very nice old lady. The real problem with the well wasn't the well test, it was the contamination with uranium. So much so that it was listed on the title report. At the time, I was using a new well guy, and for the story, we're going to call him A-Hole. A-Hole had recently split off from Rick at Pipe Pump to handle our area as Rick was so busy. Rick has been my well guy for years, and I trusted him. Rick had not just done many escrows with me, but he had repiped my well once at this point and again a bit later in life. So A-Hole had a line on a brand new filter at the time that could handle higher levels of uranium. We did the deal with a seller to pay for the filter, and $5,000 later our filter was being delivered. A-Hole wasn't there when his guys dropped it off, and they literally did just that. With a large filter tank at the ground, I was sure glad it was a sandy area and also curious if there'd be any leaks. The filter didn't leak, it got installed, the water test clean, and we did the deal. The next one A-Hole did for me was a smaller ranch in the basin. It seemed like A-Hole would mess with the pump saver and try again, and it would just run for a second then click over. The only thing that was odd really wasn't the pump saver, was the recharge. It was that the amount of water being produced wasn't slowing down before clicking over, which was odd. The solution on this deal was I believe 2 booster pumps and an extra storage tank, or maybe it was a booster pump and a pressure tank. After the installation, A-Hole gave the sign off to the bank that it was a viable system. We closed the deal, but I had some questions. Oh, ad lib, that well ended up turning to be a nice producer and didn't need any of that shit he installed. That came up later after I wrote the book. The next deal we had a well test problem was in Twin Oaks. We had an issue that the upper tanks on the mountain weren't filling. During the test, the well was producing good over 12 gallons a minute, and then the pump saver clicked on, and A-Hole said, well, suck dry. Just like before, though, the pump saver would click off with no initial water drop. You see, a pump saver turns off a well pump if it sucks dry. So then do this fly. Get back. Okay, you see, a pump saver turns off a well pump if it sucks dry. So, oh, almost got him. So they do usually, you see a drop in pressure. So you see a drop in pressure, then it indicates to the pump saver to activate. So again, I question why there's no drop in pressure. I was then made to feel stupid with a bunch of what I now know to be bullshit. He did this 3 times, and the lender required that the water fill the storage tank, which it did not. A-Hole suggested the owner should do an acid treatment. Acid is used to unclog the perforations in the well casing to allow water in the casing to be pumped out. I can remember the cost. It was like $5,000. My bid request from A-Hole was that he be here for the acid treatment, as after the last clumsy unload of the uranium filter, I wanted some reassurance. He said, sure, I'll be there. The day of the big acid bath treatment, it should be called an acid shower, we finally arrived. The seller had already done other repairs, and we were all hoping and praying this would work. and we could close. When the 2 trucks arrived, there was a helper driving each truck and no a-hole. I should have known we may have an issue when they kept hitting the curb with the large crane truck. Wendy was first to ask, where is a-hole? They said he couldn't be here. She asked if they'd done this before, and the one guy said, oh yeah. Another guy said he watched it be done. So they pulled the wellhead a bit out to pour a lot of really strong dry acid to mix in with the water in there. They also hooked an air compressor up to the well. Both me and Wendy looked at each other and said, we better stand back. We could both get the feeling that with the uncapped well, when you turn on the air compressor, it may get messy. No sooner than we got into the little eave about 50 feet from a well, they hit the switch. Super strong acid water shot up in the air just over 100 feet. We had to retreat back to avoid the acid droplets. As we looked, the 2 workers were just standing there dripping in acid because now any well water was acid. They were scurrying in their truck for bottled water to flush their face. They finished up what they were pretending to do at that point, and they were out of there. There was also supposed to be a pad poured around the well. He charged us for that, and no joke, used 1 bag of concrete. It was a 1 foot by 1 foot pad. So silly. We were not happy, and we had Rick come out to do the test, and it tested 12 gallons a minute, steady. Isn't that crazy? We learned that day that the main line to the tanks was broken by a neighbor's horse, and that's why the tanks weren't filling. We closed the deal, and to this day, I don't know if the new owner ever fixed the pipe to the tanks. On my last well test with a-hole, we had a test of a well on a ranch that had been sitting for a few years. When that happens, sometimes you get a high bacteria count. This is what happened with this test. There was an indication from a-hole's water test that there was a high bacteria count. That was actually not too happy with it because there was already some trust issues from the last deal, and they took the back T sample right before I arrived at the test. In addition, there was no smell of bleach, so I know they didn't clean any attachments before taking the sample. I crossed my fingers on it, and it came back high and it came back high in bacteria. The solution to this is a simple well chlorine shock treatment. The well has to be pulled just enough to get the shock treatment down, just like they did on the before mentioned acid treatment. This one is a bit different. The well house had a roof without a removable lid. So a-hole said when we were there that he needed to cut the roof in order to get the crane in to lift the wellhead so he could get the chlorine shock down the hole. I said okay, got the owner's approval for the well shock payment, and it was scheduled. I like to be at every inspection to ensure there isn't BS going on. So the day of the shock treatment, I showed, just like before, the truck was already there, and the guys said the same thing. They headed out real fast with a new water test. It was really suspicious, especially since I could once again smell no bleach or anything. When you should smell the commercial shock treatment really strong. A couple days later, a-hole informed me that the test once again failed, and they would have to treat the well monthly and monitor it to be able to approve it for the loan. In my memory holds, he wanted $350 a month for water quality monitoring. I said I couldn't take that to the owner, and that I wanted a meeting with him at the well. He met me in the well, and I went back and forth with him that they didn't do the shock treatment and that you couldn't smell it. They left before the test was supposed to happen. He insisted that it was done. Exclamation point. That thing was done, Kevin. What he didn't realize is that I pointed out to Wendy before, if he did the shock treatment, then where's the hole in the roof? They couldn't have done it because they couldn't have lifted the wellhead by hand. It was almost comical to say to him, then where's the hell is the hole in the roof? He then paused, and then said, you got me. I effing lied to you. I was then able to get loud. When the F do you mean you lied? You were going to screw the buyer out of $350 a month? That's an effing car payment. Then I said, get the hell out of here. I'm big and assertive. I was bigger before. So most people leave when I say so. And if they don't, then they have been warned. It's a small town, and a-hole didn't last long. I have heard other horror stories over the years. Rick is now doing all my well work. I speak to his guys about all this, and they laugh and have their own a-hole stories. I later found out that when you do an acid treatment, you always have the wellhead back down, and treatment is to run the well circulating the acid from the bottom to the top for over a long time. It's left running for a really long time. I resold the little house in the basin, and Riff's employee laughed at the 2 tanks and extra storage, and well tested in the mid-teens. Was a good working well. They didn't need any boosters, I said earlier. A-hole was always a friendly guy, and it was too bad his business practices didn't match his personality. Septic tanks can be a bitch. It's not just the smell, but to do real estate in our area, you have to know where is your selling and what you're sure you're working on. What it is you're selling, and make sure it is working right. I got my first taste of septic problems at my own ranch. We had our leach line to our own ranch get clogged with roots. We pumped it out, and my guy who came only dug up the second lid. He then used the hose to run through and get to the first tank pumped. This is a lazy way to do septic pumping. It can very easily break off the plastic, or even older ranches' ceramic pipe T that is inserted in the system that is integral to the system functioning. So we got the tank pumped and then filled back up right away. We called out the second company who dug both tanks, and they pumped both sides, which were just water, and showed us that the T was broke off at the bottom of the tank 1. It's really hard to find someone to fix a septic tank, especially back then and up on the mountain. It was such an easy fix, just a little PVC glue, but getting to it was not fun. Just standing over the tank was really nauseating. I was able to fish out the T after 20 minutes of gagging and choking. Getting the T back on was not so fun. I had to put a ladder down in the tank and go down in it so I could get glue in back on it. It took about 10 minutes. The septic guys are in the tank all the time, but that was a 10 minutes I'd never forget. The fix went fine. I then shaved my head and went throughout all them clothes. The fix went fine, but the water hose was a real problem that night. We had our entire ranch set off gravity feed from our storage tank of 3,500 gallons, so when the hose gets left on, it has a whole lot of water to drain out. My boy Aben had to leave the hose running right that night, right after it was pumped, and the water was running right into the septic lid, which was not filled back up with dirt. We happened to have the best stir fry that night. Wendy's a great cook. The next morning, our septic was trashed again, and full water tank of 3,500 gallons drained into our septic, sending solids into our leach line. We had the truck come out to pump all the water again. When you do a septic, it is usually too much of a smell to bear. Most of the honey dippers, as they're called, smoke cigarettes when they get the tanks open. This time, when they opened the septic lids, and there was less of a sewer smell than soy sauce, because dinner. The pump operator started laughing and said, "Somebody likes Chinese food." After it was pumped, I needed to get the leach line flowing again. I used a commercial grade acid funnel and hose to get the acid in the leach line. I only got the funnels from the acid on my hand, and it instantly burned up with bubbles. I only got the fumes, just the fumes made my hands bubble. That's some strong stuff. It worked, and I now used it for multiple issues. Don't let it stand on anything though, or it will eat a hole through it. That worked for a couple years. We eventually had tree roots overtake the septic and leach, so Jimmy and Cody came out to pull a new leach line. I did a house flip in Tehachapi, and I called old Jimmy out to do the pump and insert. It was really funny because I told him he didn't need to bring his tractor because I'd dig it myself. There's usually 2 lids and 2 tanks, and the leach line goes off the second tank. This septic was in a yard right in the middle of the lawn. The lawn was a lot of work, and I didn't want to destroy it, so I was very careful to dig and got to the first lid quite easy. The second one had a breather on it, so I knew right where to dig. It was so deep. I dug a 5-foot hole. It wasn't to it yet. Spent a day digging. When Jimmy showed up, I figured he'd be pissed not bringing his tractor. Instead, he walked over the yard and started hysterically laughing. Apparently, the breather was actually the access to the second tank, which is a leach pit, very deep, and it isn't dug up for inspections. Oops. Jimmy did do a small fix for me on the job. Sometime after that, I was on a septic inspection in Tehachapi for a track home there. The Tehachapi-based septic guy was a little taken back when I wanted to be on the test. Apparently, agents at Tehachapi don't want to look into septic tanks for leach pits. So after he pumped it, he came back around the house to where I was shielding my nose from the smell. He said, "You got a back tank there. You need to do a new one." At the time in the city, a new tank was about $4K. It's a lot more now. It's like 12 now. Used to be 4. That would have killed this deal, and it was a HUD home, and they're sold as is condition, and my buyer wasn't going to pay an extra $4K up front. All this races through my mind in a matter of seconds or 3. Well, all that thought going on, I insisted he show me. He said the tank was cracked, and then he then tried to show in the tank where it was cracked. He sprayed some water on the apparent crack to show me its location, and I said to the guy, "Come on, that's a piece of shit. Spray it some more." He did it. It fell off the wall of the tank. The septic guy then said, "Oh, okay, you passed. My mistake." Yeah, right, my mistake. And that is why it's important to be on every inspection. Many years ago, I was given a call by a large real estate company out of Bakersfield. They have their own lending department, and they got stuck with a ranch, so they needed my help with selling it. The only thing that was difficult was that the ranch was on a shared well, and the property owner with the well on her property decided to refuse the water rights to the neighbor and cut the apparent pipe going into the house. She cut the water pipe. The well share was legal, but this is the country. I approached the neighbor, and she was not willing to speak with me about the water rights. She had many large dogs, and they kept people at bay. In addition, she kept anyone from wanting to even look at the home next door. The dogs did. In regular circumstances, you would go to court. But with this home, the new buyers had spent over $300 on this new manufactured home, so they walked away from it in the loan. The lender, this real estate company out of Bakersfield, had this bad loan on the books, and that is not an okay thing for a lender. It's more important to get the bad home off the books than the money, which is counterintuitive, but that's how lending works. It has to do with the rating and selling low bundles on the secondary market. We needed to now sell this beautiful triple-wide, unlived-in manufactured home with no well or water. The land that is on it, the land that it was on wasn't that usable, and the neighbor's large dogs were a nuisance. After a couple months of showings the property to different buyers at $150K, we couldn't find anyone that was okay with the land, neighbor's dogs, or water. During the time that we showed it, we were able to get to know her dogs just enough that the showings weren't uncomfortable. I did receive a call from the owner, and they let me know that they needed to get it sold by the end of the month. Me and Wendy started talking it over and decided why not to try to sell it to the neighbors denying the water rights. She is angry at where they placed the big triple wide, as it looks right down on her ranch and the dogs. I actually thought it was a sort of funny and made sense to me. So Wendy worked with a neighbor, a new buyer, and I spoke to the owner, Bakersfield Company, about selling to her. They actually didn't care. We did the deal so crazy because she got this $300,000 manufactured home for $60,000. It did kind of suck that the neighbor requested that she have a different buyer's agent, so we had to split that commission, and we did do all the work. Typical. I had a seller come up to me who had 2 ranches side by side to sell. The neighbor above connected the water backed up to the triple wide after she closed escrow and started moving her things over to the house, and it was much nicer than her place. During the move, this is the neighbor that bought the place for $60K. She moved into the triple wide. During the move, she became ill and passed away. So now her brother was calling me to sell both parcels. It was a probate deal, and we listed the ranch that was ready to sell first, which was the older place she was moving out of. We sold that place, and because it was a probate deal, the buyer needed to pay for his own inspections. Probate is done in as-is condition. He refused, and that was a rule breaker for me. I told him that I required inspections to do a deal. I was just starting to deal with some CTE issues, which is brain issues. If you didn't, earlier chapters, lost the ability to speak a few years ago, how to reteach myself, all that stuff. Anyway, let me keep reading. I have had multiple concussions over the long time I played football, and this showing in my old age. I've only been able to talk again for about a week when I wrote this. Loss of speech was my first symptom, but that is for another chapter. So I actually told him to get out of my office and to use another agent, as he was being a bit rude about things. He came back to me and said he wanted to use me as an agent still, so I only agreed if the inspections were done. And I paid out of my own commission for the inspections. I also paid for offer a complete home warranty for this guy. He was actually irritated those inspections were going to happen. Just about everything failed. The termite noticed the main water leak under the home. The septic had a broken lid and dirt was getting in the second tank. And the well had a leak in the valve that needed to be fixed or the tower would not fill. I had a new septic guy now. Jimmy wasn't doing escrow work anymore, but John did a great job for me on this one. He replaced the lid and also replaced the main water line under the home, and I paid for it out of my commission if I remember right, because the seller wasn't allowed to make repairs according to probate rules. The well fisted test was a bit more to deal with. It was a shared well with 3 parcel owners. It was very difficult to schedule the original test. Another neighbor who was on the well share was very unhappy the water was being pumped water on the ground to test the well. It was very difficult to get the test done because she was freaking out that water was being wasted. This is how it works with the wells in our area. Don't drip down into the water table or pool. We're on the mountain, and fissures and crocks and racks allow water to flow underground like streams. So your well casing will go through one or a few of these underground streams as they fill the hole. The well pumps the water out of the sleeve. When the well sucks dry, it will recharge, and the time that it takes depending on how long and how much of an underground streams are flowing. To recirculate the water you pump for a test downhole and invalidate the test as you're adding the water you pump right back in. Lots of people freak out when water's wasted, but they just don't understand how it works. We finished that test and did the deal. The buyer was never happy with us, even though we fixed the place and bought him a warranty all out of our commission. A few months or maybe a year went by, and then it was time to sell the place next door. That was fun. I put it up for sale, and the neighbor called the owner brother to try to go around me to buy it, of course. The new owner let him know that it was a probate deal and required to have a real estate professional. The owner brother of the descendant was a really good person, and I now consider him a friend. He wasn't going to screw me out of anything, and he needed things done right. After a few months, we found a buyer who was Cody, the guy who helped me with my leach line a few years earlier. The neighbor also made an offer, but it was really low. The new buyer, Cody, was a local whose wife was pregnant. We were working hard to get him into the triple wide and had never been lived in before the baby was born. We did all the inspections and had a few minors repair. Then came the well test. Can you believe that neighbor that I told just a year earlier the neighbor that I sold to just a year earlier and knew all about the well and the before issues decided that he was going to deny us the right to do the water test now? Ha! It was crazy. I showed up with the well guys and he had locked us out and was being a rude asshole. We were telling this guy that we did all the repairs for his purchase, and what the hell is he thinking? Every time I got too angry, I would back off, and as soon as I would back off away, this old man would charge up on Wendy. I would then come back and say, "What are you doing? That's a woman. Get the F away from my wife." We went back and forth with this piece of shit, and it culminated with him calling me fat. Now, I lost 100 pounds later, but I used to be big, you know. You see, that is something you don't say to me. I may be 320 pounds, but I'm an athlete. I used to run a 40 and 4.9. I yelled, "No one calls me that, F you," and started punching the well house. I only hit it 3 times, but it cracked the wood and blood was running off my fist. I then said, "You get the F back in your house," and pointed at him with my bloody fist. People tend to back off when I'm assertive. Wendy then called the sheriff. It's one thing to yell and be crazy with a man, but to be assertive to a woman draws the line in the sand for me. After an hour or so, the sheriff arrived. They would not allow me to do the test without a court order, which is BS because I had the recorded well share in my hand. People should know law enforcement almost always has their hands tied by some bullshit law or ordinance. The day ended with no test and one hell of a laugh with the well guys. They all watched me do that, so they thought it was funny. The funniest thing was Wendy was recording the altercation in case this guy hit her or me. And did you know, the only thing that I fixated on when watching the recording was, damn, I need to lose some weight. Seriously, the camera adds 100 pounds and a few inches to height, pretty sure. We did eventually get a water test done, and that did the deal. The neighbor was The neighbor had a different well company come out that he was approved, and they apparently did the test before we could arrive. Bunch of bullshit. We were closed, and the buyer was pretty pleased with getting into the home. People who live in the city don't realize what it takes to have a modern day life. When you have your own ranch, you have to work on septic, well problems, broken frozen pipes, animal damage, and all sorts of crazy things. And you have to be rich. Have the construction knowledge, or having the construction knowledge that I wasn't nearly as much as an education on how things really work. As being a real estate agent in an Old West environment, I love it most days. Whew, that was a fun one. Next one's real wild too.